So, hi everybody, Steve Cady here from Bowling Green State University. Everybody say hi.
Hi.
We're in the Bowling Thompson Student Union. Right across the way is our College of Business building. They're coming on campus, getting the full experience. We're in a course called Collaborative Change and Innovation. We are working with all the various collaborative approaches from around the world, and we have guests who have agreed to come in and speak with our class. And I decided, because we had 25 people that were from all over the world that were so generous, you all, to come and share. I wanted to make it a just-in-time conference. And so we put it together, all things changed, created it, got everybody signed up, and boom, overnight, we ended up with a little conference, sent it out, and got people coming from all over the world to join us. I'm so grateful for you all. We have 4 people today, and the 4 people today will speak 15 minutes each on a few question prompts that I gave you around collaborative change and innovation. And you'll speak to those prompts and just kind of as you want. And then the next person will go after 15 minutes, next person, and then we'll take a little break, discuss amongst ourselves what we hear, reactions and questions and curiosities. We'll come back and have a nice leisurely conversation with our 4 thought leaders. So thank you all. I'm so grateful that you're making time for this. It really is a ripple effect that you all continue to have, give, and offer to the world. So thank you. I'm super grateful. And with that, Gil, thank you for kicking us off, and welcome today.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, the College of Business, for inviting me to be a panelist. I'm speaking to you from the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont in the United States, an hour south of the Canadian border, where my wife Cynthia and I live in the middle of a pasture. Cynthia has been an artist for the 56 years we've been married, and I've been a software engineer, a manager of engineering organizations, and an OD consultant. I taught group dynamics and introduction to OD at what is now Rivier University in New Hampshire for 10 years as adjunct faculty. I'm now semi-retired. Last night, I was paging through the second edition of the Change Handbook, authored by Steve, Peggy Holman, and Tom Devane, and I had a new appreciation of what a monumental achievement this is. If only I had this book when I first began to practice as an OD consultant. The thing I've been most interested in for the past couple of years is social identity theory, which I think is an extremely valuable lens for viewing the work that we do. I decided to check the index of the Change Handbook to see if social identity appears there, and it does. The index directs you to page 460, where there is one sentence that mentions social identity. So I want to spend my remaining 14 minutes talking about social identity in the hope that there can be a large chapter on social identity in the next edition of the Change Handbook. In 1991, I was lucky to be one of 120 outsiders who were invited to participate in a large conference on the future of the Australian economy in Melbourne called Workplace Australia, which produced this book. For 4 full days, I was in a whole system group of 30 people, one of 60 such groups simultaneously engaged in a search conference. I was stunned by what I experienced. Hard-nosed union leaders changed their minds. Government bureaucrats displayed openness to large-scale change. Common ground was discovered without partisan bickering. The architect of this very large event was Fred Emery, whose 70th birthday was celebrated. I was able to spend time with Fred, his wife Marilyn, and another guest, Marvin Weisbord. All 3 have had a huge influence on my work. In 1993, I tried my hand at a fairly large meeting, Strategic Planning for the State of Maine Department of Education, involving 9 people from every county in Maine, about 450 total. Maine Public TV filmed it and created an hour-long documentary program about it. I became a large group junkie. I studied the conference model with Emily and Dick Axelrod, the knowledge which I relied on for the next 25 years. I learned about real-time strategic change with Robert Jacobs, then semi-real appreciative inquiry, open space, and so on. Trying these methods the first, second, and 10th time made me nervous. I knew these methods and tools not only worked, but brought people together in ways the leaders of their organization or community never expected to see. I was nervous because I didn't deeply understand why they worked. I assuaged my anxiety by paying extensive attention to details. I made sure that a timeline hung on the wall of a future search was 2 feet high, not 2 feet 2 inches high. I went over worksheets again and again to make sure they represented what the originators of the method required. Eventually, I came to realize that the secret that enabled these large group interventions was not in the methods. It was in the people, in the participants. I now think I understand why these methods work, and it has to do with social identity. In The Power of Us, a book by J. von Bavel and Dominic Packer, is a true story about two brothers in an idyllic town in southern Germany who made shoes together, started a company, and made the shoes that Jesse Owens, the American track star, wore for the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. Owens was wearing those shoes when, much to the chagrin of the German Führer, he won 4 gold medals. Sales of the shoes exploded. During the war, the brothers had an unfortunate misunderstanding, dissolved their joint company, and started 2 separate shoe companies. Both companies, based on opposite sides of the river that divided the town, were phenomenally successful. But competition between the two changed the social identities of everyone in town. The town's citizens identified exclusively with either Adi's or Rudy's company. Walking about town, people would look down at each other's shoes, making sure that they interacted only with members of their own group. Each side of the town had its own bakeries, restaurants, and stores. Townsfolk from the other side were refused service if they wandered into the wrong establishment. Families were divided. Once friendly neighbors became enemies. Dating or marrying across company lines was also discouraged. The two brothers took their enmity quite literally to the grave. They were buried at opposite ends of the town's cemetery. At least they were buried in the same cemetery. The companies they formed live on. You know them as Adidas and Puma. The feud wasn't about politics or religion. It wasn't about land, gold, or ideology. It was about shoes. Or more accurately, it was about opposing identity based on shoes. Once those social identities were created, they exerted tremendous power, dictating where employees, their families, and subsequent generations lived, ate, and shopped. This story by now should be very familiar to us, for we live in a society divided by vaxxers and anti-vaxxers, by Trumpers and anti-Trumpers, by climate change activists and climate change deniers. Every day, facts and statistics underlying these 3 issues are published by the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and here in Vermont in our newspaper called the Vermont Digger. Facts matter. But on a surprising array of social issues, facts play a secondary role, a tertiary role, or no role. What matters is social identity. Social identity trumps facts. What I've learned from all my work with whole system large group interventions is that social identity isn't fixed. It's malleable, and it can change in a matter of hours, perhaps even minutes. I'm convinced that what makes large group interventions effective is that the process shifts participants' social identities. If you forgive me, I'm going to read just one long paragraph from my 2017 book called The Collaboration Response. This is a quote from the book. Imagine you are a teacher in a large school district and a member of the teachers' union. You are invited to an education summit on the future of the district and are determined to defend the rights and interests of the teachers. You find yourself seated at a table with a student, a parent, an administrator, a school board member, a banker, a graduate from the class of 1955, and a school librarian. You look them over. You're not sure what the 14-year-old can contribute. You're hoping that the school board member is not the one who writes op-eds in the newspaper. The 1955 graduate has a hearing aid which doesn't seem to be working, and the parent looks clueless. But they're all friendly and polite during the introductions. Soon you're standing at a timeline hung on the wall trying to remember facts about the history of the school system. Then you're finding themes and stories in the events and facts with others who are standing with you. Then back at your table you talk vigorously about the implications for the future that stem from the history. Next you look outside the school system at what's going on that might affect the schools in the city, in the state, and in the world. There's only 45 minutes to make sense of what it means for the school district, and your table has to give a report to the large group of 188 people. You're beginning to appreciate the other people at the table as each of them contributes something to the discussion that didn't occur to you. Some of them are downright helpful, and one of them volunteers to give the dreaded report and does a pretty decent job of it, including key aspects of the teacher's perspectives that you shared and that they almost got right. You feel overwhelmed by what is happening in your state and don't know how the system will cope with new mandates coming from the legislature. Your table muddles through and contributes some valuable insights to the summit at large. You have a sense that the 8 of you at your table are all in this together. You are very happy to have them as allies. The real issues are coming at the system from outside. There's an opportunity you can effect to sense some change in the world if you work together. You're a proud member of your school district and will defend your system for the student and the parent at your table who deserve the best. Your identity has shifted, at least for the next couple of days and possibly longer. Long enough for both parts of your brain to do their best to advance the common good. When the moment comes, you will let go of the narrow interest of the teachers to do the right thing for the whole system. Unquote. So, how do many of the methods described in the Change Handbook succeed through a shift in participants' social identities? Here's how. By doing these things. First of all, and most importantly, I used to think this was the least important thing, but now I see it as the most important thing. First of all, by getting the whole system in the room. Without this, there is little hope of getting participants' social identities to be with the whole system. For me, this has not always been a simple thing to accomplish with a planning team. After 8 assignments in Bangladesh to work on various issues with UNICEF, Catherine, Esty, and I were asked to lead a UNICEF strategic planning meeting that involved all 7 countries. Of course, we asked for children. This is UNICEF, the UN part that deals with children. We asked for children to be present, and they said no. So we said no and packed our suitcase to return to the airport. They changed their mind and permitted children who were street kids from Kathmandu of various ages, none of whom spoke English, the language of the conference. Each child had his or her own interpreter. At the end of this long strategic planning meeting, we asked the 72 participants for summary comments about the 3 days. They were all about the value of having the children present. Several UNICEF staffers canceled their retirements because of the presence of the children. That was number 1. 2, by carefully framing the purpose of the intervention. The task has to be expressed simply and it must be transparent. This may be the most important decision the client makes. It defines the boundaries of the whole system. It's the root of the social identities that the client will need to produce quality results. 3, by making sure that the context of the task, both the historic context and the current context, is thoroughly explored and analyzed before any work. All meaning in the current moment stems from its context. This is, I believe, Fred Emery's most brilliant insight. He got it by reading Steve Pepper's 1946 book, World Hypotheses, which is still in print. I highly recommend it. 4, by ensuring that all participants are actively engaged. All means everybody. It means that the work takes place in small groups, no longer than 8 members. It means that large groups are used for reports and summaries and a discovery of common ground, not the actual work. I watched Fred Emery enforce this at Workplace Australia. He was wandering down the hall, looked in one of the rooms where 30 people had decided to do their work as a group of 30. And Fred stepped into the room, looked at the conference manager, and said to him, "Make the buggers work." He insisted that they get back into small groups. He did this because social identities of passive participants who are only listening will not shift because their whole brains are not involved. 5, by having small groups manage their own work. This means no expert facilitation when actual work is taking place in small groups. I've had a hard time on occasion getting colleagues to resist the urge to help a small group that appears to be struggling. And let's see, with Harris and Owen, I think it's the role of conference managers in the context of struggling small groups to pick up coffee cups. My favorite book on facilitation is Marvin Sandra's book, Don't Just Do Something, Stand There. But I want to add one thing, but do stand there, don't play tennis. 6, by carefully teasing out the common ground before action is planning. 7, by giving all participants easy standing. I actually convinced Bill Clinton to participate in a large group meeting without making a speech. Okay, 8, by focusing on the future, by characterizing the future state of the community or organization with respect to the task before any short-term problems are addressed. The future state thus draws the work to it, solving problems that need to be solved, setting aside those that the future make moot. My favorite group intervention is the Axelrod Conference Model, especially the design conference, because it gave me license to experiment and innovate conference designs. In my large group intervention junkie period, I followed the script rigorously for Simureal, for open space, for appreciative inquiry, and so forth. But eventually, everything I did with my colleagues was a custom design that we put together for our clients. Some of these customs designs are things like this. We designed a whole system meeting for the Boston University Business School to do accreditation. And we got accreditation done in 1.5 years instead of the normal 3 years. We got the faculty, the students, the administrators of Worcester Polytechnic Institute to participate in a redesign in the freshman year. And we helped the Boston University Goldman School of Dentistry design a new dental school major with everybody in the room. For one study client, the experience of having large group interventions became interwoven into the fabric of the institutions. Something would happen and people would say to each other, "Hey, this involves all parts of our institutional life. It's time for a summit." Now, for the future, what I would like to see us do, this is my challenge to us, is apply what we know about social identity and the many methods of bringing people together to the political sphere. We've got tons of experience with applying our theories and methods to organizations and communities, but it's time we save our democracy by addressing politics and political structures which must change if our democracy is to survive. Imagine a redesigned Supreme Court confirmation hearing that is a triumph of the discovery of common ground and not a sham, not an opportunity for partisan attacks and talking points. Imagine a curriculum for the education of politicians based on the ideas and legacy of Nelson Mandela, who took whole systems very seriously. Imagine a whole systems approach to elections. My 15 minutes are up. I've got a lot more to say, so I look forward to some of your questions.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really awesome. So we have our next person to go. Everybody kind of
Woo!
Gil, some hands. Hey, Gil, thank you. That's awesome. And so our next person. Keith, is that you?
Steve, that is me. That is me. Are you? Yeah, I'm ready to roll.
All right, let's roll.
Okay. Well, many thanks to you, Steve, of course, Carol, Teo, Lisa, who pulled all this together, and it's wonderful. And I had a chance to visit with the class yesterday, so I'm going to talk a little bit more directly to them rather than everyone. I've already learned something. Never go after Gil. Oh my God, that was a great talk. Bad positioning. Steve, what was your win? Why did you put me after this fabulous?
You deserved it after
okay.
activities yesterday.
I did encourage the class to lovingly provoking Steve in a continuous manner yesterday. And he's only got 4 days in a row, all full days doing this intensive work. So he doesn't deserve it. So I do deserve this spot in the agenda. All right. So I want to say a little bit, something a little hard. This comes out of primarily noticing what's happening in the world and the degree to which some of the ideas we love have not penetrated, have not become a part of everyday practice in organizations. And I can see that in lots of different ways, but over the last 2 years, I've had clients first that showed up saying, well, we want to work on social justice. The pandemic, we've got to have safety. We have to safely take bigger risk in our business, but our operations are completely disrupted. We desperately need to work on the climate crisis. And I didn't think there could be another something that came up, but how about a war in Ukraine? Right. So the number of things that are not working very well, the number of institutions, the number of clients that are in disarray has gotten under my skin, right? It's gotten under my skin. And so I think the methods that we're working on to answer the first question you posed, Steve, I think we cracked open the door, but we haven't really distributed the approaches that can address these challenges. And it's more pressing now than ever. So we've cracked open the door. Yeah, so I'm a kind of a fan of science fiction, and William Gibson may have said the future is already here, but it's not well distributed. So I think we have the things, the methods, the approaches, but they have not been well distributed. So I want to talk a little bit of how could we distribute the things we know and know how to do to address these challenges and do more than crack open the door. So I'm going to tell a story or two, and my co-author for the Liberating Structures work is lurking in the background. I don't see him on the screen, but generally he'll fix my stories. So he may need to pop in and fix a story. But there's one that I want to tell, goes back a bit before these bigger challenges came into focus. We got some work. I'm going to call it some work that we got because of our approach to fashion. So a fellow, I'll call him a celebrity facilitator in Paris. And by celebrity, I mean, he looked like a celebrity, had beautiful silver hair. He could wear a polka dot shirt and a blazer and cufflinks in a way that just your jaw had to drop when you looked at him. And he had been outside watching one of his people in a client organization of his, come out of the room in which Henry and I had run a liberating structures workshop. And what he noticed was that the Parisian scarf was out of place. People were kind of laughing and disheveled, which never happens in Paris. And so he was super curious. He got on a plane and flew over and talked to Henry. And we did a much larger scale workshop months later in Paris with him. And what unfolded was a great workshop. Gil, many of the social identity, the way it unfolds in 20 minutes or an hour, the group got into a group flow, not an individual flow, but they were, all of those things happened over a 3-day period. They learned probably 25 or 30 separate modular methods that we call liberating structures. And so the way that in that relationship, there were some conventional ways of thinking about spreading the work. So this fellow wanted, first thing that he wanted once we'd done the work and seen what it was, said, well, I want the exclusive for France. Well, there was an easy no to that. And then we want to have a certification program where everyone becomes learns how to become an expert. Hard no to that. Right? We're not going to make this into a certification program because it's too good not to be distributed for free to everyone. Right? So this was quite a few years ago, but we were more intuiting what it would take to distribute a way of working that influenced everyday behavior and everyday habits, not what was happening in the big event. The big event is easy. You can always you can use any number of methods to get a group going together, but what happens when they go back to the office? So we're in Paris, of course, we're going to stay longer, and we're hanging around. Henry and I are hanging around and have office hours. We're willing to come in and work with anybody who's been in the workshop or not. And we get an invitation from 15 product managers, and they have had a meeting every month. See, this is where Henry would come in and fix things for me, and maybe he will. They have a terrible meeting every month, and they've been doing it for 2 years. So at least some of the project managers have been in the workshop, and we're invited into the meeting. We've got 20 minutes or a half an hour, and we walk into a room in a completely luxurious office, and the lights are really dim in this room, and everyone has a computer. They're in a U-shaped table. Everyone has a computer in front of them that's slightly open, and you can see that as we walk in that many of the people are doing their email. But there's somebody in the front of the room giving a presentation. And what we're being brought in to do is help them make their meeting better. So we're like, were you in our workshop? Did you? And so this is a critique of our own methods too. I think everybody needs to think about, they weren't very well translating what they learned at the event or about events to their work. So we did the simplest possible thing, which you can learn in a minute or two, called 1, 2, 4 all. And we did it 2 times. So we turned on the lights, number one, and said, okay, I'd like each person to think about what's wrong with the meetings. What are the things? And think for yourself for 1 minute. Talk to the person next to you 2 minutes, a group of 4. And then we'd like to hear at least one group, like, what was the big problem? What's the problem with the meetings? And the first group reported they had 2 things. And then we asked, well, does anybody have anything different or the same? And everybody said, oh, we have those, right? We're 7 minutes into our 8 minutes into the time that we're in this meeting, and we've identified the problem, and everybody's agreeing and going like that. We do another round of 1, 2, 4 all. Well, what kinds of first steps could be taken? to address this challenge, these problems. And again, 1, 2, the minutes, exactly the same thing. And there were 2 solutions that quickly were identified, or first steps toward a solution. And the reason, and it was a miracle for them. So what I'm suggesting to you with this story is to the degree to which there's a degree to which I would like our work, the things we know how to do, to be integrated more into everyday work. And that's the important thing for me. It's the fundamental important thing. And I think there are attributes with liberating structures. We're trying to do those things. And I only have a few minutes, but I'm tempted to share my screen briefly. So I'm going to do this to be just slightly more explicit. The kinds of things that I think would help with a more distributed approach, which we're trying to do and have modest results, is make everything expertless. Can you learn 1, 2, 4 all in 1 or 2 minutes? Can it always be results focused? Can you rapidly and iteratively cycle through and recycle through it? Can it be seriously fun, wildly inclusive, work for 4 people or 1,000 people? Does it spread itself? And can it be modular? Can the pieces be arranged and can be independent but arranged and rearranged? And last thing that we did a little bit with that I think is important is to have some kind of underlying design DNA. And we named this with liberating structures, that every approach you use has an invitation to explicitly distribute control. You insist on children coming, Gil. The children must be at the meeting and they must have a voice in shaping what happens. You are very explicit about configuring groups. You arrange the space, whether it's virtual or digital, and you very thoughtfully distribute and allocate time. So that's my story. I'm sticking with it. I'm wondering about my time. I didn't use my own timer. I come in on time, Steve. How am I doing?
Sure. No, you're great. It's great. We can, if you want to say a few closing words, and we can transition. That's great.
Yeah. So that's what I care about, what I want to create in the, looking to the future to make the work more easily, put it in the hands of everyone, all of the people. And I do appreciate that we have graduate programs to create super expert people, but that expertise, if it can go to distributing the ideas into practice in everyday work, that's what's important to me right now, to address climate change, to address social injustice, to address the pandemic. I'm not going to say it's over. So to address the pandemic, these are the challenges in front of us. So I appreciate the chance to share this story with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks.
Yeah.
Give you a little finger applause. There you go. Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you.
it. And hi, Jackie. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm from Michigan, not too far from Bowling Green State University. I'm about 30 minutes directly north of the University of Michigan. And it's just a pleasure to be here. I want to acknowledge, Gil, I really love the history you bring into this, the giants you bring into this. And Keith, I've never met you, but I like how you bring in the importance of bringing global challenges, some people call grand challenges, into everyday, such the intentionality of everyday conversations. So I looked a lot at those 4 questions yesterday. And the first one was Steve asking me, what is my latest thinking about collaborative change? So I want to preface my thinking that, 27 years ago, I was introduced to appreciative inquiry, and I was sitting in my doctoral program, and I met David Cooperrider, and he was teaching a class called Qualitative Research Techniques. Raise your hand if you've had the qualitative research class. Well, David Cooperrider was teaching that, and it was called Appreciative Ways of Knowing. There was no 4D, 5D cycle. And I had Ron Fry teaching appreciative management and leadership in that same semester. And so to me, appreciative inquiry was simply a way of doing qualitative research, asking questions that were of value. And it wasn't until 10 years later, after AI first emerged, that they came up with the AI 5G, 4D cycle. And can you raise your hand if you know what the AI 4D, 5D cycle is? So about half of you, well, it looks like all those hands are going out, but that methodology was how I worked in organizational life. If you're going to bring large groups together, you would define why are we coming together? I like what Keith had said, first we spend a little time on what's the problem? Do we agree on this is the problem, but what are we really trying to make happen? And we would literally choreograph a conversation with anywhere from, are you going to have 50 people to 100, 500 people? I've been in large group methods with 2,000 people, and we're going to have a conversation about what's possible in design. What really has been my latest thinking was going back to my roots of the appreciative inquiry principles. And I realized with co-authoring a book with my co-author, Sherry Torres, who has a psychology background and a systems background, it's in our conversations. Whether you're in a classroom of 15 or in an event with 1,500 people, it's all about the conversations that we're having in the room. And I thought that's where my latest thinking has been. And appreciative inquiry, after 27 years of working with it, has become my personal operating system. So I know appreciative inquiry very well, the principles, the practices, the 5D cycle, how it blends what Gil talked about, OST, open space technology, the dialogue, the methods, the dynamic facilitation. These are all very blendable. And I'm glad Frank is going after me, but Frank, when I think of Frank, he always says, get comfortable with the mess and bless the mess. And it's very hard to keep it structured when you're trying to follow the energy and the wishes of the people. So that's how my thinking has changed. And my thinking has probably changed a lot in the last 3 years because when I was a doctorate student, I did my dissertation. It was a capacity building framework. The only people that would read a 300-page, oops, let me just turn my phone off. The only people that would read a 300-page dissertation might be other doctorate students. And so what kind of emerged from my dissertation, it's really what you do after your dissertation that is going to make a difference. So your dissertation is going to do research and you're going to do discovery, exploratory work. So I came up with this framework called SOAR. And so if you think of appreciative inquiry as my operating system, imagine if you could enter systems and have a conversation, very difficult conversation, but start from a place of strength, because strengths to strengths will connect people, and consider opportunities and come up with things that we never thought perhaps were possible. And what I wanted to do today was share 2 stories quickly. And I can send you the article called SOAR 2020 and Beyond, but probably my origin story postdoctorate was an organization that I had to step into. There was 400 people, and they were going to close the plant down. It was a Midwestern town. And my assignment was to work with about 100 people who represented the people in the plant and come up with a 3-year plan to shut the plant down that would minimize its impact on the people and the community. So needless to say, I had dinner with the plant manager the night before, and I knew that SOAR was going to be my guiding framework, and that I was going to take them through this 4D cycle. And I wasn't there to teach them. I was there to facilitate a conversation so that they would come up with a plan. So when I walked into the room, they were all pretty much sitting like this. And I had to get over the fact that it wasn't that they didn't like me, they didn't like the conversation we were about to have. And I started the conversation from a place of, we know why I'm here, to facilitate a conversation. And the holding company has faith in that instead of them telling you what you're going to do to shut the plant down, you're going to come up with this plan. And I asked them a few questions and came to the realization that they're not even sure why the plant was put on the shutdown list, except that there were all these factors, these metrics that they were not meeting. And when we had the conversation of what the problem was and why we were here, I threw out something. I said, what if we created a revitalization plan? I just threw out a topic. And they're like, hey, Stavros, we're on the shutdown list. This is what our purpose is. And I said, well, what if we created a revitalization plan and we asked the holding company out on the East Coast to give us 12 months, just 12 months to make this happen. And if it doesn't work, then the plant's shut down. We give them the 2-year plan instead of the 3-year plan. It felt like a really long time, but it was only about 2 hours when they finally agreed. What do we have to lose? We have everything to win. And they knew what the strengths were of the plan. They knew what was going on well. They knew what the possibilities were to revitalize the plant. They all talked about their aspirations. They agreed that let's give this a second chance. And at the same time, if it doesn't work, we'll shut the plant down in 2 days. So the plant never shut down. We took the plan out to the East Coast. Corporate got what they wanted. They got a 3-year plan, 2 years to shut it down, and they agreed to take a little more time and say if they could turn around the plant. And actually the holding company, then they created this revitalization list. So, that goes back to the possibility and the collaboration of that story. So the plant never shut down. And the second story was actually a story on collaboration. And it's an organization in the US that has about 400,000 employees. And it's an organization that is part of the government. And a general told a deputy director that you are going to tell these 1,500 employees how to collaborate. They're all working in silos. Now, a lot of times senior leaders come in from the top and they tell you what's going on wrong, what you're doing wrong, and what you need to be doing. And the deputy director came to visit with me and said, we read in that book that Gil held up, they went through the change method. And he said, I know we can blend these methods together. And what if we had a conversation with 150 people that represented the 1,500 people to decide, how do we collaborate? And there's a colleague of mine that's part of your cohort, Tony Benner, who really understands engineering and OD. And she came together with me and we facilitated a 2-day conversation with 150 employees. And they came up with a plan on not only what collaboration would look like on this base, but what it would look like across the enterprise and these bases that were connecting throughout the country. So it was a 1-year event, I thought, and Tony and I are going into our 4th year of working with this organization because collaboration is embedded into the organization. So, I could go on and, Steve had suggested picking a couple of stories, and it was really hard, but these are my 2 favorite stories because it's taking what you're learning, these collaboration techniques, and bringing people together and choreographing a conversation, whether it's 50, 150, 1,500 people, that there's like 4 principles that I want to leave with you. And the 4 principles are: understand what your operating system is, understand what methods are you blending. So for me, my approach is appreciative inquiry is my operating system, and the methods that Gil mentioned, I can blend them together to come into an organization and be simply the facilitator where they're creating the change. So it's a whole systems approach. The second thing I ask you to think about a principle is what I call purpose. When you step into work with teams and organizations, be really clear on the purpose. Why are we coming together? What are we going to do? And then let each person in the room connect a purpose. This only takes a few minutes, no matter what size, and say to them, why is it important that I showed up here today? And what gifts do I bring? And that begins to build collaborative purpose. So my core principles of collaborative work as appreciative inquiry has always been my operating system. I think you have to, number two, get really clear on purpose of why we're together, and then connect on that purpose so people are more open and innovative. SOAR is simply just a framework. If I'm going to lead people together, I want to connect them to strengths, possibilities, which are opportunities, understand aspirations, but we have to also have some results and be held accountable. And then last of all, I think the fourth principle that I use is Jane Watkins is one of my mentors, and she passed many, many years ago, but she would always say, plan tight, hang loose. And so I would build on what Jane said, is I'm a planner, details. I would plan tight. When you're inviting people into a meeting or a summit, you plan tight, you hang a bit loose, and you follow the energy that's in the room. And sometimes you won't do exactly what you may have thought you would do for 2 days or a day and a half. But as long as you're following the energy in the room and people get to create something, people really commit to that which they get to create. So those are kind of my stories. Principles, Steve, you asked me to talk about principles, and then I'm going to end with just a funny kind of note. So the AI I believe in is appreciative inquiry. It's for human systems. And when I step into a room and people think I'm going to talk about AI, they think I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence. And yesterday when I was wordsmithing and word checking a document, every time the word work or working was in the document, the spell checker wanted to change the word to collaborating. So even artificial intelligence is catching up with us, knowing that work really needs to be collaborative. And that's it. I don't know how much time I have left, Steve.
No, that's great. That's perfect. That's a great note to end on for today. The journey continues. Everybody that's a part of this, we're going to be continuing to dive deeper with each of you individually and collectively over the coming year and so forth. So this is just a great, just a little taste of all that you know. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so Frank, I love your microphone. I'm jealous. I want one.
Thank you. I did it on purpose so I don't have to talk loud.
You have that voice.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's only because of it's the microphone, really. I'd love to take credit for it, but
You sound great. So
cool.
Anyway, well, welcome, and we're looking forward to listening and hearing you.
Thanks for inviting me, Steve, and welcome all students. It's great to see Jackie again. I've known Jackie for a long time. I've never met Gil or Keith, so I really appreciate meeting you. I really like what Gil said about social identity theory. And one of the reasons I like that he did that is too often in the field of OD, we concentrate on methods and techniques, and we don't have a theory that explains why it works. I think, for years, we've talked about building theory in the field of organizational development. So I was really happy to hear what he said about social identity theory and the idea that social identity trumps facts. I really like that. And Keith, it's a pleasure to meet you. I like your challenge to all of us to bring these methods to real world problems. I started to fantasize, what if we did a large group summit and next time we have to have a Supreme Court justice? I like your challenge around global challenges. And Jackie, of course, I've always liked your work, as you know. It reminded me of my good friends, David Cooperrider and Ron Fry, and your notion of choreographing conversations. And I think that's where I could probably pick up here. And of course, our dear departed friend, Jane Watkins, who you mentioned, and her phrase was to plan tight and hang loose. And I want to talk about the opposite, which is to plan loose and hang tight through a metaphor of jazz. I'm gonna try and do in 15 minutes 2 things. That's one too many. But I'm gonna give it a shot and see if I can make it work in a way to answer all Steve's prompts. My background, I was a professional jazz pianist before I went to graduate school at Case Western. I still play, not very often, but I still play. And that has informed a lot of my research and thinking. And also, I was at Case Western Reserve in the early 80s before Appreciative Inquiry even started. I was doing my research at Cleveland Clinic along with David Cooperrider. He was 3 years ahead of me as a student, and we both worked with Suresh Srivastava. In fact, we didn't even call it Appreciative Inquiry. We called it Appreciative Analysis. And it started to evolve into what you now know as Appreciative Inquiry. It's funny you said AI. Jackie said some people think AI means artificial intelligence. And I worked once with a group in agriculture, and they thought AI meant artificial insemination. So AI, so you never know where lightning is going to strike with people. So at any rate, let me say a little bit about why jazz is my main way I think about collaboration. I think jazz bands improvising are an ideal learning system. It's the way executives live. If you look at the way executives live nowadays, it's very similar to the way jazz musicians live. Is that you're facing a world that's the future's unknown, and it's your action that's going to make the future happen. There's no guarantee that what action you take is going to work. It's a high velocity environment because there's lots of equivocal information going by simultaneously. And equivocal is different than ambiguous. Equivocal means there's many possible interpretations. You have to choose one. And as a jazz musician, you have to take action in public. And you can't, once it's in public, you can't get rid of it. I mean, you can respond to it and do other things with it, but once it's out there, it's out there. And you're doing it with a group of people who are doing the same thing simultaneously. And that's what jazz musicians do all the time. They're at the edge of their comfort level because the goal is to create something you've never created before. And it's interesting, again, to think about social identity in these terms. In a way, jazz musicians are always putting their identity at risk because there's no guarantee that whatever action you take is going to work. But it's a perfect appreciative system as well. Jazz musicians are constantly saying yes to each other. They're making offers and saying yes. If there's not an appreciative mindset, it falls apart. Problem solving doesn't work. You can't go back and say, geez, I wish I hadn't played that 2 measures ago. The moment's passed. What you only can do is say yes to what emerges. And so it's an ideal learning system where people are making offers and accepting offers. And one of the first things jazz musicians have to do is be suspicious of their own habits. If you rely on everything you've done well, and this is why I meant when I was reversing this thing is plan loose. What I mean is you can't rely on patterns and habits that have been successful and are second nature. Those, in fact, are your enemies because the goal of jazz is to play fresh on the spot, things you've never played before. If you stay with your habit patterns and just repeat what you've been doing, that's not jazz. So you unlearn your habits to try and overcome a trap, what we call competency trap in organizational learning theory. Maybe you've read that, and someone comes from Jim March. The competency trap. It means you get better and better at doing the wrong thing, but you keep doing it because it's been so automatic. So in jazz, we try and unlearn those things. And then say yes to whatever emerges. What I like to call is, Jackie made reference to this, say yes to the mess. Because it's on the edge of chaos. Oh, thank you. Thank you for holding that book up. Appreciate that. We didn't rehearse this. It was thank you. And the notion is, we have to build agreement. In collaboration, we have to come to an agreement. Well, too much agreement is dangerous. We forget about that. Agreement's good, but it should be agreement about the non-negotiable and about the right things. That's one of the things that makes jazz work is minimal agreements, They're the non-negotiable, but just enough that allows people to embellish and move into the future in unplanned ways. And the part I mean when I said hang tight is mean tightly notice each other's offers on the spot. So tightly coupled, to use the phrase from Carl Weick, it's a tightly coupled system, is that you're paying close attention to the offers in real time. But again, there's a minimal agreement through time and a minimal consensus that allows, well, I call it minimal structure, that allows people to collaborate and respond in real time. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to say, give up the things that come easily, say yes to whatever emerges, and you don't have a thick structure to rely on, then you can be sure that there's going to be mistakes. So one of the things about jazz, and it's and I really like this principle. You probably have all read Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety. The notion is that errors are going to happen. What's the mindset around errors? The mindset is these are learning opportunities. In jazz, if you try and not make mistakes, you have just tried to not be a musician. It's impossible to go forth without making some unintended moves. But in jazz, we instead of trying to fix mistakes, you actually repeat them to see where else they could lead. You repeat them and see if you can go further with it, take it down the road, notice new possibilities. Some of the greatest recordings in jazz history, back when we used to do more live recording of jazz, actually have mistakes. And you're listening to people in real time, making great things out of messes. The other thing about jazz is important. I call the principle I call hanging out. And what I mean is being together with no agenda. And so jazz musicians jam, we do jam sessions. Those are learning laboratories, but also afterwards hanging out and just talking and asking questions. I think about if we transfer this to organizations for a minute, imagine unplanned white space where people are just hanging out. And one of the reasons is it's the place where it's legitimate to ask naive questions. In the context of day-to-day organizing and formal organizing, people are often too embarrassed to ask naive questions because they're supposed to look like you know what you're doing. But when there's a white space and just a place, even if it's just a social hour or whatever, a lot of great wisdom gets shared there. We call it legitimate peripheral participation. On the sidelines, a lot of legitimate learning is happening. And one of the things I forgot to mention earlier, the enemy of improvisation is shame. When the shame voice is winning, you cannot improvise. Because it's the voice that says, that's not good enough, we don't know what we're doing. And every jazz musician is in continual dialogue with the voice of shame, the one that says that's wrong or somebody else is doing it better. And status is the mother of shame. Systems that have high ladders of status, hierarchy, are also places where you can bet that the shame voice gets a lot of room. Because it always looks like there's somebody better, somebody knows what they're doing. And in jazz, we're constantly trying to keep that voice quiet. Otherwise, we can't branch out. The other thing I want to call attention to is, we talk so much about leadership and the importance of taking leadership and leading. How often do we ever talk about followership? We don't have a language to talk about followership as a noble calling. You want to say, geez, I want to raise my son to be a good follower. That sounds like a silly statement. Well, I think it's not. It's not a silly statement. In jazz, we have a vocabulary for what good followership looks like. Followership could be a noble calling. We call it comping. Comping is short for accompany. And, when the soloist is soloing, and you take turns. So everybody gets a turn. There's distribution of participation. That goes a long way towards overcoming status barriers. But if you're not the soloist, your whole mission in life is to make that person brilliant. So you support their thinking. As they're thinking out loud, you contribute as you can to help them think well. But you don't do it too well, you just became another soloist. So I mention that because imagine if we had noble followership as the legitimate way of being in organizations. Imagine performance appraisal systems where some of the categories are, how well were you a catalyst for someone else to thrive? How did you support someone else's idea development even though you didn't get credit? How did you make room for other voices to emerge? Could you imagine if we made that part of our whole evaluation process? If we brought that into organizations, it would be the equivalent of rediscovering fire. So let me check on my time before I make a switch here. Steve, how much time do I have? Sorry, I didn't see. I was listening. I wasn't watching.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, then I'm not going to do it. I was going to show a short video of the Appreciative Inquiry Summit we do with the Navy. So I'll just tell the quick story. Since you wanted stories of collaboration and my old Appreciative Inquiry days, we introduced Appreciative Inquiry to the U.S. Navy. I teach the naval officers and Marines at the Naval Postgraduate School. And we've done several now large group summits where we have 300 people in the room doing planning for the community. That's been my most inspirational change project, and it's been going on for quite a while now. I'll hold off and give my time over to others rather than get started in another point. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Frank. And the nice thing is, Frank, that we're going to take a little break and then come back and ask questions. And we have a lot of time for questions. So someone can ask you to share that video so, and talk with you about it. So there's plenty of opportunity for us. That's why I wanted to make sure we had the white space, almost equal time white space for a little bit. So we're going to take, and what we're going to do is Lisa is going to put our guests into small breakout rooms of about 3 people. And Lisa, you'll go around and check and make sure they're actually there and that kind of thing. The panelists, you will stay here. I'm going to mute you in the room here so that you all can have a conversation, step up, stretch your legs, do whatever you need to do, or take a little movement. And then you all can have a conversation. We'll bring everybody back in 15 minutes and we'll discuss, what did we hear? What are our reactions? What questions and curiosities do we have? So it'll be, let's say it's 12:07, it'll be 12:10. So we go 10 after. So you go to 25 after. So we'll come back at 25 after. And we'll pick up where we left off. So Lisa, if you want to go ahead and take care of that. And thank you all so much. Frank,
Let me just get this clear. Are we in on these, Steve?
Frank, what's going to happen is you're going to stay in the main room.
Yep.
And then the participants that are here are going to go to breakout rooms.
Okay.
You with the panelists will stay right here. You all can have a conversation. I'm going to mute it in the room so you can have a conversation.
Okay.
So,
cool.
And in about 15 minutes, we'll come back. And we'll all have a conversation with you and share from our breakout.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, and for those that are going into the breakouts, just know that you can, take a 5-minute break if you want to get up and stretch and everything, and then come back to your breakout group. This is not panelists I'm speaking to. So I'm going to open up those rooms for those that are not panelists, so you can get your room first.
I'll be right back.
Yeah. Hey, wow, what a panel today. There are no slackers in the mix at all. Really awesome. I'd never heard Frank before. He's good. Oh my.
Oh my goodness.
There's a number of, I don't know, probably half a dozen jazz maestros who've turned into consultants. Frank, I was just complimenting you, so you should probably go like that. but you're eloquent. Jazz is such a great, well, one little quick story, at Plexus Institute, Complexity Science Institute, we got the Orpheus Chamber Group, which is a leaderless chamber group.
Yeah, you know them well.
To mix it up with a jazz group out of New York. I forget the fellow's name, but there was a leader. He composed something and said, let's watch the jazz players in my band and the Orpheus group learn how to play this together. Let's watch how they learn something new. And there were so many great lessons there. And the Orpheus folks, they were all masters of improv in a way, or good followership, as you might say, or leader. The difference between leading and following was clearly understood and shared. It's pretty cool.
Cool.
Well,
Richard Hackman was a very good friend of mine, and he did a great study of Orpheus. So yeah.
Yeah, Frank, I listening to you, so it's like using jazz as a metaphor for all of the principles. It was magical. It was just really, and I took a picture of the person who shared the learn the rules like a pro and break them like an artist, because it's one of the things we've been trying to drive home in the weekend. And I just saw the ultimate from each of you in doing that, that you can take it wherever, and the integrity of whatever that concept is remains. And Gil, I want to go home with you. If your wife will allow, she's 56 years, she has nothing to worry about. But I'd like to come home with you and just have conversations.
Well, great. Please come. Where are you?
I'm in Georgia. I'm in the US. I'm in Georgia, just south of Atlanta.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But anyway, it was just for each of you, the what we've been trying to accomplish on the weekend, you just took to extremes. And again, Keith, the way you took it in and applied it to real world. I was so excited. You weren't on yesterday, but David Isaacs was on. He's associated with the World Cafe. And at moments like this, he said, "Oh, my cells are all in jubilation." I think that's about says it for me.
Frank, I'm in touch with Marvin Weisbord every now and then.
Yeah.
He now lives in a retirement community where he devotes himself to jazz.
Jazz piano. I played duets with him. Tell him I said hello.
I will.
That's amazing.
Great guy.
I'm also a graduate of Case Western.
Oh, you were when?
1962, I got a bachelor's in mathematics.
Ah, okay, good. Cool.
And Jackie, I was a classmate of Jane Watkins. We were part of class 5 of AUNTO.
Yeah.
Yes, it was just so nice to hear these names again. Jenny, it was just really good to hear some of those names again.
Yeah, Jane was very instrumental. Her and Marge Schiller, when I got started on Appreciative Inquiry, just invited me in the early 2000s on so many projects with them. And I learned so much working with Jane and Marge at that time.
And who mentioned Sharish from Case?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Right.
the first article that I saw on this whole concept, he was one of the thinkers on that. Yeah, this is so wonderful.
Speaking of NTL, is NTL still operating? Is it still going?
NTL is, but AUNTL has stopped operating.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
And NTL struggles.
Yes, I stopped in Bethel on the way to visit Cynthia's brother who lives in Maine, and I said, Cynthia, we had lunch at the Bethel Inn. We walked down the street to the
gosh.
NTL Conference Center. And oh, I was shocked because there was the conference center with plywood over the windows. The grass in the lawn was 4 feet high, and there was a sign. The worst part was there was a sign that said, "Coming, luxury condos."
Oh, no.
So,
That's right.
So,
They sold it years ago.
I'm super curious about the beginnings of OD. A guru for me is Roger Harrison.
Ooh.
And at some point, Peter Block wrote, he wrote something in our book, but he always writes something wonderful. And he said, if all the early founders of OD were in a canoe, Roger Harrison would be on the front, tipping way over the front, paddling in some direction that wasn't relevant, maybe. But I wondered, was he part of the mix of the early days in OD?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was on that edge. I have an article that I share with people often. Do you remember how he wanted to talk about love in organizations?
Mhm.
And how people really put him down for wanting to do that, and how I was listening to a podcast on the resetting of leadership that all of you may be familiar, that happened a few months ago. And someone brought back the Roger Harrison concept of how love is now, one of the answers to how we do the work that we do. But yeah, we were living in California at the same time. We made a couple of videos together. But you're right, he'd be out in front.
Is he still with us?
I know.
No.
About 7-8 years ago, he passed.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Cool.
And Jackie, it's the first time I've seen your face, but just the quality of your work always, it's just really nice to see your face.
Well, thank you. It's
Yeah,
nice,
and
nice to be here today.
Yeah.
Francis, how are you involved with the Bowling Green or the OD community?
I'm what they call adjunct faculty.
Mm-hmm.
So in one of those, what happened in OD network meetings years ago, someone introduced me to Steve, and he just kept showing up. So when he started this OD, he called me one day. I was in the grocery store. I was in the parking lot of the grocery store, and he was so excited that he had now gotten confirmation for this doctorate in OD, and he wanted me somehow to be connected with him. So for a while, I've been co-teaching courses like this one on the weekend.
And what do you get to teach, Francis?
Well, that's an interesting question. If you know Steve Katie, I have Keith answer this for me. But
Yeah.
He has course titles, but what I would say we get to teach is we get to teach what I'm trying to help people to do is what you've done today. Is these are people who get a doctorate in OD. So Steve's thing is to be a thought leader. And my thing is to do the work so you have something to share in depth about the leadership, what you're going to talk about or write about. But what I'm trying to get people to go deeper into all of the purpose and the concepts. My little byline in my company is bringing the wisdom of the past into designs for the future, because I think a lot of that's gotten passed. So he has typical name courses, but I think a part of it is to help people to be deeply grounded in the meaning and the concepts, and for him, he encourages people to write and be thought leaders. I think that's
well, and your name is very familiar to me too, and that's why I was just trying to think, where have I seen you? Where have we met before the pandemic?
And that could be anywhere from ODNet.
Were you in Vegas? just before the pandemic?
No,
October?
I was
No?
not in Vegas just before the pandemic. No, I did a keynote in the ODNet for like 2 or 3 consecutive years.
It's just strange to see everybody starting to come out of their boxes and into real settings now.
Yeah.
If we try to make things how they were, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to just, no, please. There's no going back at all. But it seems like some of the bad habits are coming forward. And it's like, no. Anyway, sorry.
Jackie, did you have an operating system before AI?
I actually think, knowing what AI, I think before I knew what AI is, it's always been, the deeper I know, it's always been my operating system. Coming from a place of I was always curious, asking. My dad would say, "You ask so many questions," when I was a kid, and so it was that latest article that Lindsay Godwin and I just did in the AI Practitioner Appreciative Inquiry. What's your personal operating system? And the other thing in the community, a lot of people who don't know a lot about AI think it's all about being positive, and that's why I love hearing Frank. Frank, you bring so much wisdom to Appreciative Inquiry. And Jervis Bush is another person about generativity. And if you look it up, the word appreciate means to value people, value things, to add value. And that's what we're trying to do by our questions. Our questions are so powerful. They can shut you up, they can just open you up. Does anybody know Bill Rothwell?
Oh, yeah, I know the name. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. He was asking me if I knew anybody that really could write about the history of OD.
Oh gosh.
Um,
I think people need to do that, but you know what? If you, I worked at Exxon for 13 years, and some of Herb Shepard and some of the early experiments around OD were done in Exxon. And there was a document that was written, it's unpublished, about the history of OD in Exxon that I think would be very helpful because it goes all the way back to the experiments that were done in the refineries and how they went from personal growth into thinking about OD. So I'm going to put my email in the chat. I'd be happy to share that because I think it is helpful.
Hey, that would be great.
So, take that.
There are 2 people, God, what are their names? Rowan Simonson and Amy Lenzo, who are doing a series of origin stories. And they've tapped a number of people that I learned from. It's a little gated, the access to the origin stories, but they're doing a pretty soulful job of pulling it together. I like their approach to trying to get at origin, so that what they were good at is like, well, who influenced you? Who are the giants that your shoulders of whom you're standing on? And did a nice job. And they take enough time to dig into the origins. It's not exclusively OD, but a lot of the people that we've just been talking about are already part of their origin stories. And the name of their, let's see, Beehive Productions. Here, let me put the.
What everybody doing?
Well, we're doing all kinds of networking.
Oh, I'm not hearing you. Hold on, it's gonna be unmute you. Undo the thing. Here we go. I can hear you now.
Thank you, Keith.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Meg Wheatley, Harrison Owen, a bunch of people. Interestingly, a bunch of people ask about the origins of the work that I've done, and but just for myself, I don't know if you who are the people and when they wrote, and it was all in a period from at least mine were from 1992 to 2001, and then after that, I don't know, complexity science is the main inspiring body of work that helped me and the people who embraced it a little bit. And then it just dropped off. Maybe I wasn't exploring any longer, that's possible, but a lot of the really important work seemed to be done in that period. It's fun to dig into it, super fun.
But a lot of roots happened long before that period.
Oh yeah, well, just meeting you and talking to you, I was like, okay, yeah, the roots, but the things that I read that deeply influenced me.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
And I think it was my own exploring period, my deeper.
Frank, where are you physically? Are you on the West Coast or are you back on the East Coast?
East Coast,
Okay.
Cambridge, Mass.
Mm.
Hmm.
How about you're still in Michigan, Jackie?
Yep, still in Michigan. Was driving my daughter to the airport last night. She had got accepted to Duke, their policy program, and her flight got canceled. And that was the bad news. Something bad weather in Atlanta, Francis.
Well, I have to tell you, my friends, Juanita Brown and David Isaac took 2 days to get from Orlando to their home in North Carolina.
Wow.
Every flight they were on was canceled around Atlanta, between Florida and Atlanta. So it's been horrible.
Yeah, so she missed the orientation. So she
Right.
sent a message to U of M, that their core public policy school, because their orientation, she was accepted there. And the dean called her last night and said, no, come today, 8 to 7. So I think it was divine intervention
Yeah.
that her plane was canceled. And
Yeah.
I prefer her to be 30 minutes from home.
Oh, I know that feeling. I remember those days.
Thank you guys for these resources on the origin stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also the document I put in there are just some of the people who had an influence on me, who a lot of them are not OD folks, but scientists in other fields who went at complexity science. And Frank, Bill Gold was one of the fellows, he jazz pianist, worked a lot at the Mayo Clinic, made the transition to a consultant.
Wow.
And Gil, is that your real bookshelf behind you? Is that because is that your real setting?
That's a real bookshelf. Yeah. I knew Bob Chin of Benny, Bennis, and Chin.
Right.
He became a friend, and he and his wife made many trips to China to teach organization development. And after Bob died, A. Lee invited me to go with her to China and teach organization development.
That's right.
And then A. Lee gave me a big chunk of his OD library, which is on the shelves back there. And I was just wondering
That's great.
if I might have some materials that if you're interested in the early history of OD. I'm just wondering if I have something back there that might be of interest.
Yeah, it's exact. I typed in the chat that it's your office looks exactly like, I sent it to Francis, Jack Canfield's office. That's why I thought maybe the two of you must know each other or something.
You know, it's so interesting that there's some of us who still love books. You know, sometimes when I have a project, I go shopping in my own bookshelf. I have books that I opened and read the forward once, and now they are just valuable. And someone sent me a very old book. Gil, you might know this one. It was it's almost like the most famous articles written about OD. It's a very old book out of public, but and I'm trying to see one of the journals that a lot of them got published in, but that'd be a book to look at also. Yeah.
Well, I'm just jealous looking at your office because my husband talked me into taking about 500 books out of my home office and donating them to my university's library. And so they put them in a place on a shelf and cataloged them for me. I still have like another 800 books in my room.
That's good.
It's just something.
So the students are having a really good time chatting. This is the first time they've been together for almost 2 years without seeing each other because of the pandemic. And so we brought them together for this residency for the first time. And they are deep in conversation. We'll bring we'll bring the others back from online and we'll talk with them. And they all know that they can come in. I made it very easy. Come in, or if you want to keep a conversation going, please do. So I think we just keep our conversation going. I know the one person that wanted to see Frank's video is very curious because she's from the Navy. And so she's very curious about how the work you do and stuff like that. So they'll probably make their way in here in just a few minutes. Yeah. But I think you can, Lisa, you go ahead and bring people back in and we can open up the conversation for people that are here online.
Yeah. So Frank, I worked for the Navy as a civilian for a number of years during the time that Admiral Zumwalt was making change around race. That was my doctoral dissertation of how that shift came in the Navy. So the Navy Training School and the other school was where I did a lot of my research. So I would be very interested in seeing the video also.
Yeah, great. Wow.
So Frank, is this the long 20-minute video or do you have a shorter video?
I'm gonna show like 4 minutes of one.
Is it of the original video?
Yeah, the original video, original summit. We revised the way we did it in future summits. So, but the videos are not as good. So the summits got better and better, but our camera work did not.
And I have a question when I'm thinking about the video. When the Navy did their project many years ago, didn't they actually do a D a day? Like it was 4 days, whereas now it's like maybe a half a day for a D, but it was a 4-day summit, if I recall.
It was a 4-day summit. Yeah.
That's probably one of my favorite videos. So I would encourage, if you can put the link in the chat, I would encourage people to watch the whole video.
I don't think I have it online yet.
I think you can get the video on the AI Commons. If
you probably can.
Yeah.
Probably.
So who put the link in the chat about the Navy?
Oh.
Did anyone put it in?
No.
No. Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay. So while Steve stepped away, he had just said, and welcome back everyone else who was in the breakouts, that we could really just start some conversation here. And here he comes. Okay.
I just want to offer a word of gratitude. Frank, I've never actually formally met you, but you in some ways are responsible for my ending up at the OD program at BGSU. Initially, when I was looking for an opportunity to go to master's school, I couldn't really find something that resonated. And then I found out that BGSU offers an interdisciplinary master's degree. And so for about 3 semesters, I pursued an interdisciplinary master's in OD&C and jazz studies. In no small way inspired by starting to hear about your work and really resonating with this idea that we can learn from musical human interaction for other organizational interaction. So that dissertation is still forthcoming, and I'll have to see if you might have a look at it at that point.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. What's your instrument?
I'm classically trained cellist, but mostly play bass and guitar these days.
A bass player will never starve.
Amen.
Tell your kids that. A good bass player will never starve.
I don't know what they're talking about. That was super cool. Frank is sharing.
So just wanted to say thank you.
Okay, so do we have questions for the panel?
The room looks empty. What happened to everybody?
They're eating and they'll be back in here.
Oh,
And they're
okay.
having great conversation. But we have
Okay,
people from the breakouts that are here. So there's Jennifer and Julia and Sheila and Dongmin and Kaliso. So, and there's Henry. Hi, Henry. It's good to see you. So we just loved it. It's very open. So well, it's just a very open. There's Petra and Stefan, and it's very open just for a conversation to go anywhere you want to go.
Should we? Are we supposed to wait for the students to come back in the room?
No, just let's have the conversation now, and then they'll come in, and then I think they might ask you some questions from in the room. So it's very loose right now.
Cool.
So we did a group question. Henry documented it for us if he wants to throw it out there for us. Otherwise, Julia, you have to help me remember because I didn't write it down.
Henry might have stepped away, maybe.
No, I think he's trying to get off mute. Is my guess. Well,
There he goes.
We were trying to figure out the wicked question for managing chaos.
well,
Henry, can you help me? You said it so well.
he wrote it. He facilitated into a common documented question for us. Of course, we didn't write it down.
If
I
you
think
can
we're-
manage it, is it really chaos?
All right, maybe not. I don't. Julia, let's wing it. How can we started with how can we?
How can we, excuse me, how can we facilitate positive changes from bottom up while maintaining sort of structure, predictable or comfortable?
Could you repeat it?
How can we facilitate the positive changes, ongoing positive changes
While
against
still
status quo?
maintaining, yeah, that's some kind of level of structure, right? So you imagine kind of all the examples we were talking about how all the examples we get are really great. And, you know, there's books of liberating structures and all types of wonderful examples. But in reality, when you get out there, how do you, anything from what's going on in the politics, turbulent times to just a work situation and people resistant to change, how do you then start to begin those positive impacts, but also still maintain some level of stability?
Order, stability, structure.
So that it's not complete chaos, right? It's not everything being topsy-turvy. So any advice from the panelists on your experiences to start now? Do one thing now. Where does it start? How do you get it to start moving without necessarily putting the whole world on fire, I guess? Is that appropriate, Julia?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
And Henry has background noise, so I put what his response was in the chat. If that adds to it.
Years ago, something similar, Ralph Stacey, professor in the UK, said, how is it that I'm in charge, but not in control?
Exactly. So this is the question to panelists. Thank you, Henry. You put it such beautifully. That's it.
This is Jackie. So, when you step into chaos or you're part of chaos, I like what Keith said is I always say with the self is that you have to tune into yourself, ask yourself, where am I? Are you above the line? And above the line to me is that appreciative space. And sometimes you're below the line, that depreciative space. And maybe you're below the line because you didn't get enough sleep. You're not hydrated, your belief system, but something triggered you. And so you want to, when you're approaching the chaos, you need to be above that line. And, I always say, pause, take a deep breath and get really curious. And where are the people in the room? And you don't ignore the problem, but I think it was Keith in his 1, 2, 4 all is that you spend a little time letting people vent, letting people talk about the problems, their issues and that. And at a point in time, you have to say, okay, so what's the positive opposite? Because you talked about positive change, Jennifer, in your question, and keep going, because the positive opposite, the flip is pretty easy. And then you say, well, if the positive opposite was true, what's the frame? This is where the framing comes in. What do we really want to be talking about? Who should be in on this conversation? And what do we want to happen? And to me, that's the art, and that's the theory and the practice of appreciative inquiry, is the questions we ask and the way we frame it so that we can have a conversation and co-create where we want to go next and how we're going to get there and who should be involved.
Question right here. How do you define this line? Because when you're below the line, sometimes you're not aware about that.
Well, that's why, so if you drew a straight line, when you're below the line, if you pause, breathe, and then get curious, the pausing and the breathing automatically resets your body mindset, your parasympathetic nerve, so that just pausing and breathing brings you to that place that you can be much more open-minded. And so if you're going on and it's chaos and that, and you're below the line, you're not in a place that you can be open-minded and have that mindset to move forward. So just that simple technique, and even to tell the people, let's just take a pause, everybody. And just the breathing, what you're doing is you're messing with their body chemistry in a good way. And then you can get them to be curious and change their mindset and say, all right, everybody, what do we really want to be talking about? And you move, and that's where you move that conversation to get to a place of where we want to be. There's a really good video, and it's only 3 minutes long. It's called Where Am I by Conscious Leadership. It's 3 minutes. And I show that video, doesn't matter what I'm teaching, who I'm training, to teach people to ask yourself, where am I? And it says, draw a straight line. Are you above or below? And that above place is the appreciative place.
Jackie, could you put that link in the chat?
Yeah, I'm going to grab it right now.
Thank you.
The question was first asked by one of you, is not the one that's wasn't worded the way the one that's in the chat, but you said, what was the right structure? That was the way you started the question. What's the right structure? So I think that's what I heard, at least. And it's getting me thinking here about that question, because I talked about jazz. Jazz works because it's a minimal structure, but it's a minimal structure through time. And that's the trick. Minimal structures, they get just enough agreement about just the right things, are really helpful. So think about appreciative inquiry. Jackie has mentioned the 4D cycle. Well, when we were first starting to do appreciative inquiry, there was no 4D cycle. And there's a lesson in that. Structure is retrospective. When you're living into a future you don't know yet, it feels like there's no structure, but in retrospect, you can see there was a structure. You can see what the patterns were. So one thought is to pay attention to the flow of time and notice how structures are emerging through time. But that means you still could offer a container. So in a way, the 4D cycle is a minimal structure that you know after you get through the first, just about the time you get through discovery, when should we start looking at dream? You start asking those questions based on what you learned from the past. The 40 cycles of minimal structure. You can also create pulsating groups that have minimal structure. The CIA had this practice where all their agents were out doing different things separately. How do they share knowledge? Because there's this intense, deep knowledge. They'd have lunch every day at a large table and just talk. And they would do it every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and it was just a minimal structure. I think about the way they dealt with in 9/11 after this huge mess, this gigantic pile of a building that's broken down. No one had ever had to recover that and had deal with that kind of a mess. What did they do? They created a minimal structure. They had a meeting every morning at 8 a.m. and every day at noon at the classroom building that was right next door to the pile. And everybody who was working on, the first thing they did was divide the pile into fours. Say, this company, you take that, you take that, you take that, and we'll just check in with each other every day at 8 and every day at noon. If you miss the meeting, then you're going to be out of luck. That's a minimal structure. That's what I was thinking about.
I'm thinking about one of my clients in New York, the New York Academy of Medicine. We helped them go through a major change initiative. And the original 5-day summit meeting we had generated all kinds of action steps. We looked at those action steps that belonged to some existing part of the organization. There were some that belonged to human resources and some that belonged to janitorial services and so we just let those intact organizations do their thing the way they would normally do it. But there's lots of actions that spread across the organization, and we provided one little piece of support for those cross-functional action teams. And that is, we got them together every 6 weeks, and we simply we gave them an exercise to report on what they've been doing and their struggles and so on and so forth. But then we put them in mixed groups, and we had mixed groups look at systemic aspects that were going on. So it was a kind of a learning exchange. It was just one day. We got all those action teams, all those cross-functional action teams together for them to learn together. It was simple and extreme, but very helpful to them.
Just one back to Frank's point about the over time. I was working with an international NGO peace-oriented group, big organization, 4,000 last month or 6 weeks ago. And we started a strategic planning activity. And the first step is always purpose in that work. Right after, it was 5 3-hour online sessions. And the first one was on purpose. And then the Ukraine was invaded. And the temperatures, a lot of the leadership of the group were Eastern European and had escaped tyranny of some sort. And we sort of had an appreciative but not very sharp purpose in place after the first session. Well, the second session, we're always iterating purpose. So let's return to our purpose as we work on understanding context, or let's return to our purpose as we're working on where we are, our baseline, or let's return to purpose as we're working on what we hope is possible, or dream in the D's. And so we're in the second 3-hour segment of this time with this peace group, and their purpose gets 10 times sharper. I mean, we return to it, they have a chance to sharpen a little bit, and it becomes, we exist to support activists that are working to end violent conflict and tyranny everywhere in the world. And okay, that was enough to get them, whatever amount of chaos was going on, which was pretty much everything for them, because that's their work. The purpose anchored them. Not everybody, because some people were below the line, Jackie, well below the line, for all variety of reasons. COVID the work is totally disrupted because they're all mostly working virtual. They're in lots of places all over the world. So at least for me, the iterative process and return to purpose and sharpening it over time is a huge deal.
Please don't forget, you are all high level energy facilitators. You're already there, always conscious about your baseline, bottom line. Others are not there yet. So the original question was how to facilitate the positive change. Positive change is kind of representative of chaos. A little bit of chaos is needed for the change. At the same time, we don't want to create the crisis like this war or whatever it is. So the question how to have it positive changes while maintaining this line, I think.
So I'll just go back to you, Leah. It's a beautiful question you ask, and you have to just teach and learn with others and tell them, you know, the more you can. I do this with my young students who are 17, 18, 19 years old, my freshmen, and I just teach them, not just for my class. I said, I want you, every time you step into a situation, whether it's on the football team or my class or your math class, tune in and ask yourself, where am I? And I show them that video clip. And I said, and then ask yourself, how did I get here? And how do I get to that line? And sometimes it's as simple as knowing your triggers. And you can't, you know, it's so hard to deal with chaos if you're coming into the chaos below the line, because you can just start bringing everybody below that line with you.
So true. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie.
You're welcome.
One little practice that participant in that group I was mentioning said, I suggested that anybody could come, leave, attend to whatever they needed to do in their life and come back in, and their colleagues would be there and would have their back when they returned every time. And that's a responsibility we need to share across the group, and it made it possible for all kinds of people to participate where they were really below the line until they could feel that support of their colleagues. And so when Gil talks about the social identity, that's part of, you know, you can get that going if the group takes care of each other.
Okay.
I will try to reformulate this question to the chat for the record. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I think Sheila threw out another question in the chat, but Sheila, if you want to say that yourself, feel free, because I'm fighting a cold and my voice is not good.
Sure. Yeah, so my question is in part, how do we continue to stay open? I think there's such a richness of ideas that's been shared so far over the course of the 2 days, demonstrating the value of collaborating with others and learning from different expertise and experiences. I'm an internal consultant working in an organization where finding the executive team and executive sponsors that I'm working with are really prescriptive and fixed on their approach. When I look at historically over time, that fixed approach and that prescriptive approach hasn't exactly served the organization well, but there isn't an openness to try new and different things. And so I was just curious if there were recommendations or suggestions about how to crack that door open, as was said earlier today, to keep it front and center, to try new and different things and invite new and different people into the conversation.
I just want to say, I believe this was Gil. Gil, were you the one who told the story about UNICEF?
About what stuff?
UNICEF and the planning you
Yes.
were going to do?
Yes. Yes.
I think knowing your core values, knowing your mission and where you want to go as the facilitator or the person entering the room. And I just love that story by Gil, that he said, look, if we can't have the kids here, I'm not gonna do this. And liberating structures, I think, Keith, you were the one to say agreement is good, but too much is not. So really knowing, what's going to get them there. And sometimes it's not doing something if the person who's hired you, or even I told my president once I wouldn't facilitate something he put me into because exactly what your question was. And I stood strong and said, I'm happy to facilitate this. And this is how we need to go about it. And this is who we need in the room. And when he said, oh, we can't do that. And I said, I'm not your best facilitator here, and stepping away, and they know where they can find me and what I can do. But, I would love to hear Gil and Keith say more about that.
One quick thing I put in the chat, and it's pretty easy to use. It's called TRIZ. We borrowed probably shouldn't have used a Russian engineering approach to name this thing, but it's to suggest with your leader that have already the idea in mind about how to do things. Whatever challenge is at hand, you try to create a perfect adverse system to get the worst result imaginable. And when you ask people to do that, like it's a surgery group, how could you operate on the wrong side every time? They know how to do it. So how could you create the change we want with lots of fanfare and expense, but it falls flat and we go back to the way it was? How could we do that? Invite a group to do it in which they use 1, 2, 4 all or something where every voice is heard. And the group will discover for itself that they need to go somewhere new with a new approach. And there'll be outright, flat out laughter, hilarious gallows laughter as a result. And usually that'll crack the door just a bit to something that you want to try. So Frank, over to you.
Well, the way you asked the question was leaders who insist on structure, insist on very prescriptive. I think at first it's good to just notice what that instinct is. My sense is that instinct is usually driven by fear. And it's good to know that. It doesn't necessarily give you a way to handle it right away, but I know I'll say 2 things. Love drives out fear, and safety drives out fear. So when people feel safe enough, they can experiment. When people feel loved enough, they can experiment. It's just good to know what's behind it, what's going on there.
That relates to something we talked about yesterday. We talked about senior executives being lonely, not having a lot of connections with other parts of the organization, and by facilitating some kind of way in which the prescriptive leaders sense the empathy of the organization around them, that may soften them to something that's less prescriptive. Do you remember that from yesterday? Those of you who were around. So I guess my instinct is to focus on those prescriptive leaders. I think that's what Frank might have been suggesting. What's going on with them? Why do they take this stance? And so forth.
Well, thanks, Gil, and thank you, everybody. The students are popping in and out. We have a wonderful group here. This has been just a nice leisure conversation that's been full and rich. So thank you. What inspired me over this last few days has been a conversation I had with my son about God. He asked me a question, and he says, "What is heaven like?" And I talked to him a little bit about heaven, and because we just had to bury a chicken, and I told him the chicken was in heaven and that it didn't have hawks coming after it. It was eating all the worms it wanted. And I was talking about it, and he said, and my son said, he's 8. He goes,
you know, Dad, I want to go there now. I don't want to go and stay. I just want to go and check it out and come back, you know? And so as we talked a little bit, he said, well, what's all this about? What's this? Why, you know, why are we here? And I didn't know, you know, in the moment, I just said, you know what? And it was just off the cuff. I said, I think we're here to learn how to love and be loved. I think, and at the essence of it, if we can learn how to do that, to do both, and it just left me kind of thinking that's as simple as I can get it, you know. And I'm so grateful for all of you here because I think you're committed to that essence. I know that, and I'm grateful for all of you. And we will have this conversation will continue in many ways. We're committed to continuing out this All Things Change and Nexus for Change and our doctoral program and the work we're doing. You know, I'm committed to helping us connect this network of networks to Central Garden. And I'm really grateful to you all for being so generous. Thank you.
Nice to meet y'all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Pleasure.
Have a great rest of the day. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.
Steve, I'll be right back.
Danke an alle.